Hey guys, welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have an incredible guest. Her name is Laura Weiss. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Maya. I'm super happy to be here and tell Ben's story.
I am super excited to have you here as well. And I want to dive straight in and tell Ben's story, your story, and really your whole journey. And I know it's been quite a journey for you. So I'm going to hand it over to you and you can kind of tell us a little bit about your background, your relationship with your brother, and then the progression, unfortunately, to his passing, because you have quite a unique story. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Laura.
Sure. Ben was one of my best friends. We were very, very close. So he was almost more like, almost like a child to me than a brother. We really stuck together growing up. We grew up as 2 of 5 children. It was pretty chaotic. Growing up, mom worked nights, dad worked days. Mom had her own mental health issues that she dealt with. And my dad was the son of alcoholics. So he was a pleaser and constantly worried about mom. So we were kind of left to our own devices quite a bit. You know, if maybe there was food in the microwave when you get home, maybe there wasn't. Making sure the homework was done. As I tell Ben's story, he, even growing up, was on the dramatic side and stubborn and sassy. He absolutely loved animals, loved his family, and was a very, very forgiving person. I actually see a lot of him in my son, who is instantly forgiving no matter what happens, because his love for his family was just that big. So, when bullying or picking on started, I'd be the one to get on the bus and go talk to the adult, or get off the bus and go talk to the kids and try to straighten them out to protect him. He gave great advice, even though he didn't feel like, he always said that he was boring, led a life of being constantly bored. And I never saw that in him. He was a people person, whether he recognized it or not. And he always knew the right thing to say. So, that's one thing that I always miss about him. He absolutely loved his nieces and his nephew. He was a caregiver and would have given the shirt off his back to any of them that might have needed anything. He is the type of person that can make you infuriated with his stubbornness and then make you laugh in the next second. So he was always, keeping me on my toes, always constantly connected to what his niece and nephew were doing. And, he only lived about an hour and a half away. So we were able to get together, barring the weather here in upstate New York. We were able to get together quite often, and oftentimes we would be getting together even if the rest of the family wasn't. With the rest of the family, we always say you do the thing. You show up for 2 hours at Christmas, you have the turkey, you open the present, you go home. You just show up and do the thing. It never has been very emotive. We don't talk. There's no hugging. There's no deep-seated conversation. So that was something that I had with Ben. And I don't have with any of my other siblings or my parents, even to this day. So it was always comforting to know that I had someone as close to me as Ben was, because of the fact that I didn't have that with anybody else prior to, my husband. I had girlfriends that I'm super close to, but it's just different when you come up and he knew the story of, how we grew up. And it was comforting to have someone who had almost the same story as I did, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's what our siblings are, right? They, people who have not gone through this loss, right, Laura, they don't understand, sometimes what they have until it's gone, right? And I don't wish this on anybody, but our siblings are so special, and to help educate people, the reason why this loss is so significant, there's so many reasons out there, but one of the main reasons is because nobody experiences life like you, like a sibling, because you typically have the same parents, the same ecosystem. You grow up together. They're your first friend. They're your first enemy. They're your first fight. They're your first playmate. So it's an experience. And I can connect with you as well, because I know what it's like to be the caretaker and to take care of your siblings. And that's a whole additional bond too.
Yeah. When Ben was in middle school, I was the first person that he came out to. And it was really always a badge of honor for me that he felt safe enough and loved enough that I wouldn't judge him, and that I would, he'd still be my Ben, no matter who he was or who he loved. That was one of those moments where, when you live in a small town, you don't know what you're up against when you're viewed as different. So, those protective motherly instincts kind of took over after, I mean, I knew, but when he officially told me, I felt that I could take that information and still keep him safe. And feeling like he could still move forward in this town where there wasn't a large and isn't a large gay community. Traveling with him to other places so that he could, go to drag bars and gay bars, and we had a blast doing so.
Yeah, I love
Being
that.
with his community. He opened my eyes to a lot of different things that I never would have experienced if he wasn't who he was. My sister is best friends with my mother. My oldest brother is best friends with my mother. My youngest brother, he has Asperger's, so he doesn't really have a whole lot of emotions, even though we didn't talk as a family or emote as a family. And then my parents were just so distant that Ben was really that connection to, he knew my relationship with my parents. He knew that I distanced myself from them and that I didn't appreciate how we grew up basically fending for ourselves in organized chaos. They taught me how I did not want to parent. So, taking note the whole time I was growing up of what I was going to do differently when I had my own children. And he knew that, but he could still love me regardless of my relationship with our parents, even though he was so forgiving of everything and just moving forward. Whereas my other siblings, I was always the jerk. I was always the one making a big deal out of everything.
Yeah, I know what that feels like. Yeah.
I've learned a lot through therapy on how to deal with that, especially within my own head. Oh, I'm not going to say anything because I'm always the jerk. I've moved on from that. But Ben always just accepted everybody for who they were. So, he was my safe place as much as I was his safe place.
Yeah, I definitely can tell that he felt safe with you to come out to you and to then bring you along that journey and that experience as well. I mean, I want to go with you guys. That sounds so fun, but he knew he was safe with you to tell you that and open you up to this other world. And that was his world. And I think that's really special. Like those are super special memories, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, and now I can think about it and grieve him appropriately. It did take a lot of work. It took a lot of, when I initially sought therapy, I just sought grief therapy, but I ended up with a grief and trauma therapist, which I think was what the ticket was, because I had trauma that I didn't realize I had to work through in order to grieve him appropriately. I can feel sad. I can write about him in my journal. I can I have his hat, one of his hats, and I have a pair of his glasses, a couple of his t-shirts. I can look at those things and wear those things and be okay and feel sad he's not here because it's not fair. But I'm also not, my light is on, my light is not out. And, at a certain point in my grief process, my husband looked at me and said, this isn't going to work. Your light is out. You are not doing the work that you think you're doing in grieving your brother. And so that trauma really needed to be addressed in order for me to have a healthy sadness that he's not here, but appreciation for the fact that we had the time that we had.
I think that's so beautiful, Laura. And I think one of the things about, there's so many layers to your story of loss and Ben, but I think it's really beautiful that your husband is such a support for you and has been such a support for you and was able to say to you, hang on a second, like, I think it's time for you to get some help for this. And I love when we have supportive partners. I think that's really, we're strong, we can make it through these things, but to have those people in our life is just so special. And it makes the process, I don't want to say easier, but you just feel supported and it helps move the process in a direction that I think, again, is healthier. It can be hard, as you see in groups and, from other people that have lost where, they don't have someone that's supportive in their life. So I really like that part. And I really want to highlight that part of your story too, because, and I love how you say the light, like your light, that analogy. I think that's beautiful. And I think a lot of people can connect with that.
I know no one needs permission to get help. It's okay to need help and ask for help, but he almost was giving me permission. I thought I was doing okay. I thought that was how sad I was supposed to feel. But, he has lost his father. My husband lost his father 14 years ago. And so he understands a big, big loss. He absolutely loved Ben. And actually, my husband was able to keep in better contact with my brother-in-law after Ben passed than I was healthily able to do. When I couldn't reach out and I couldn't talk to him because it was just too hard.
Sure.
my husband was still able to talk to him and say, no, she's okay. She's not mad at you. She still loves you. Of course, you're one of us. She just needs time and she needs to do this work. So he was also able to maintain that connection with my brother-in-law almost in my place when I couldn't, because I wasn't there yet. Now I'm there, and I've actually been able to work with my brother-in-law. He went into counseling, and I said to him, I think it's great, and any counseling good, but I didn't have a grief counselor. I had a grief and trauma. And I'm sure that there are things to get you to this healthy place to feel sad enough, but not to feel like it's putting out your light or taking over your life. And it did. It had taken over my life. And since he's actually changed counselors. So I'm hoping that helps him move into a place where it's a healthy amount of grief.
Yeah. What a great point too, that
It's been,
again, I think that's beautiful that your husband's able to maintain that relationship for you and, help you along in that journey, because sometimes it is really, really painful. And, as you guys know from my story, I stayed in touch with my brother's girlfriend, but it was ebbs and flows. And, we don't talk a whole lot now, and it's a different type of relationship. They weren't married, but I can connect with that. It can be painful sometimes because that person represents your brother, that's like their love was poured into that person as well. So it can be difficult, but it sounds like you guys have been able to support each other in a really beautiful way. And I think it's a journey, right? It evolves. And I think that's really the message there too. We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you a bereaved sibling, a forgotten mourner, or as we call it here on the Surviving Siblings podcast, a surviving sibling? Well, I am too. My name is Maya, and I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I created this show for siblings just like you to help you along your grief journey. And now I've created even more resources to help you along this lifelong journey. I wrote the grief guide for the surviving siblings so that you and I can travel along this journey together. Within the guide, it has prompts to help you with a validation exercise that helps you validate your feelings of grief. We also talk about the stages of grief, and we also have a timeline exercise that helps you journal as you continue along your grief journey. I share tips throughout the guide on my personal grief journey as well and what worked for me. You can find this guide on Amazon.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And of course, you can visit our incredible website, thesurvivingsiblings.com. In addition to finding the grief guide, you'll find merchandise that supports you as the surviving sibling, as well as our show. You'll also find our support group that meets every month, our Ask Me Anything Mondays, and so much more. So make sure to visit thesurvivingsiblings.com for more information, and don't forget to order your grief guide today.
About myself and a lot about how I interact with my family members. And I think that through work, that's even healthy, in a healthy spot too. I know my healthy boundaries. And even though, when Ben was passing, I made some promises that I had to rework so that they worked for me in terms of how I interact with my family. I was able to do that work and set those healthy boundaries so that I can move forward in a good spot, just to be a role model for them, even if that's all that I'm able to do. It's been very, very helpful.
Yeah. I know. I'm so blown away by your growth and your progression and your grief journey. And, it's a journey for life, like we say, right? But I'm just blown away. So I want to go back to kind of the beginning of Ben's story, and his lost story, unfortunately, is a long one. It's a long story. And I know you're going to educate us today as well about what Ben unfortunately was diagnosed with and his journey. And this is not something that a lot of people know about. At least I didn't until I read your story and spoke with you. So could you kind of take us back there, Laura, and tell us a little bit about Ben's diagnosis and his journey?
Absolutely. We didn't know Ben was sick, and actually Ben didn't know he was sick either. He ended up with a freak genetic condition called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. It affects about 1 out of every 100,000 Americans, and it often presents as something like COPD or lung disease. it either attacks your lungs or it attacks your liver. So Ben's was even more rare because his attacked his liver and not his lungs. So attacking your lungs is much more common. So when my sister had a baby in February of 2013, and of course it's the middle of winter, it's upstate. We didn't see a whole lot of each other, even though we talked by phone quite often. Ben always loved to check in with my son. He was in, kindergarten at the time, and it was just a trip for him to hear his stories. So we talked quite often, but I hadn't seen him. So since it had been cold and we'd been apart for a while, we wanted to meet the baby. We hosted Easter that year in 2013. So in April, we had everyone come to our house, and in walks Ben, and he was orange from head to toe. Even the whites of his eyes were bright, bright yellow. And I remember making eye contact with my mother and sort of looking at him and looking at her and her looking at me and just kind of knowing that's not what he's supposed to look like. It was shocking the way that he looked. So I remember saying to her, not making a big deal out of it because God forbid we emote, but saying to her in private, like, does he look yellow and orange to you? And she said the same thing to me. And I figured that she'd catch up with him. I don't know if she had any conversation with him, but after we did the thing and we had the Easter dinner, about 2 hours as it usually is, everybody left, but Ben and Brett stayed. And we were actually having a couple glasses of wine and talking. And I asked him, are you feeling okay? You look a little peaked. Just went, and he was feeling fine and nothing was wrong. And he didn't have anything to report. Now, at the time, he was working multiple part-time jobs, and he didn't have health insurance. So I was encouraging him to just go get checked out. Let me know if you need help with any of the financing of that. But why don't you go get checked out? Sitting around that table that day, he kept saying he was just fine. So I didn't know any different. And I actually don't know about any conversations that my mother might have had with him in between Easter and June. Now in June, I got a phone call from my brother-in-law that said Ben had been taken to the hospital. He hadn't eaten and slept. He'd been in a pain that was 10 plus for days upon days. His belly was all distended. And finally, he said he had refused help. Finally, he said, no, I need to go to the hospital. So I believe I was on my way home from work because I remember being in the car. So I hung up. I said, okay, I'm going to go get the family situated and I will come to you. So at the time, my daughter, who had just turned 1, had something going on with her medically, and we couldn't quite figure out where it is. And, this kind of comes into play with my relationship with my parents and how they responded, because I called them next. And they said, as I'm getting my 1-year-old and my 4-year-old organized and, telling my husband what's happening and trying to get on the road to go see Ben, I called them and they had just gotten to a conference for work that was in Virginia, and we're in upstate New York. And I told them, and my mom's response was, well, that's liver failure. And we'd never had a conversation about his health or what the yellow orange means. I'm not in the medical field in between. And she got very, very upset. But then they stayed in Virginia for 4 days. And that started the path of me really looking at my parents as just less than parents. Because in my opinion, I would handcuff myself to my child until I knew what was wrong and not let them down in that way. But they stayed for 4 days. So I went to be with my brother and my brother-in-law. And, he had to be drained. His belly had to be drained. He had about 5 liters of fluid in his belly. And he had one gastroenterologist that kept coming into his room in the ICU and asking him questions that I never would have thought to ask him about his lifestyle and his medicines and what he drinks, what he eats. He was a cigarette smoker. And he just kept saying, that's not it. I can't put my finger on it, but that's not it. That's not it. And he knew there was something that was wrong. He managed to refer him to another gastroenterologist who gave us the diagnosis of alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. So your liver has something called a MELD score that's anywhere from 6 to 40. And the higher it is, the sicker your liver is. Okay. So according to the research, alpha-1 tends to present between the ages of 25 and 50, usually white Caucasians with a European background. you have a protein that's made in your liver called AAT, and it helps protect your lungs. If you don't have enough of this AAT, your lungs can be easily damaged by pollution, dust, COVID, cigarette smoking, or smoking anything else. And often it's diagnosed as COPD. You can have treatment for the rest of your life. And live a relatively normal life, but there is no cure. You just have to do these augmented therapies. And the increased level of AAT helps protect your lungs, and that protein is in there. Now, Ben affected his liver because his liver was making the AAT. It just wasn't able to release the AAT to his lungs. So he was getting somehow all that trapped down in his liver, and his liver wasn't functioning correctly to release it to his lungs. So he used to get really, really mad because they would always say that he wasn't sick enough. As long as he took his meds, his MELD score would stay down, and he just wasn't sick enough, because you can have a liver transplant or lung transplants. And he met with those teams in a bigger city in our state, and they just kept saying, well, you're not sick enough to even go on the list for a liver transplant, which was infuriating for him. So his MELD score highest was never got higher than 22. It was usually between 17 and 22, which is pretty sick, but nowhere near 40, which is where he would end up on a list for the potential of a liver transplant. So he just never quite got there, but he could have lived a long and productive, healthy lifestyle with his treatments and with his therapies and with his medicine. The problem with Ben is that he is extremely stubborn. And so about once every 6 months, we just started riding this wave. About once every 6 months, he would sort of hit the wall, and the medicine made him sicker than he wanted to feel, and he wasn't going to survive anyway. And he'd stop taking his meds. He'd start to fill up with fluid. He'd end up back in the hospital in pain, being drained. He'd get back onto his medication.
So it was a cycle, like
it
you
was a
shared with
cycle
me before. Yeah.
He was
Wow.
supposed to stop drinking. He was supposed to stop smoking. He didn't stop doing either of those things. So when he'd tank and go off his meds, even though they weren't even good on his meds, he'd get even worse, and he'd get sicker and sicker. He also hated his gastroenterologist. You couldn't tell him anything.
That doesn't help, right? It doesn't help. If you don't like your doctor, that doesn't help on your journey.
So it's not like if I don't take my meds, it hurts him, but it didn't like him at all.
Right.
So because of his liver function, he couldn't even take a Tylenol. So as he got sicker and sicker because of this tidal wave that he was riding, he couldn't go on something like an antidepressant. At a certain point, he lost his Social Security disability. Unfortunately, the system is such that they give you 3 years, and then they say, well, let's go reassess. And they could say, well, it's been 3 years. You're still working part-time. Obviously, you can be on your feet, so you don't need this anymore, which wasn't the case, because he eventually got to a point where the pain was such that he couldn't work. So then he had social isolation. And then he would lose his therapist because he had lost his Social Security disability again. So it was a really, really tough road. And that took us way up to 2018, which is, about a 5-year journey when he would go on meds, off meds, and back and forth.
That's a tough cycle, Laura. That's so tough. It's not only taxing for him on his body, but, mentally and emotionally. And someone who's, worked multiple jobs and, just been on the go. And then now he's, dealing with this. And I didn't know that as well about the Social Security and how that, we all know there's lots of things that are broken with our system. That's a whole other podcast, right? But I didn't know that it was 3 years and then reassessing. And, I can understand, I can hear them saying, well, if you can work part-time, working a part-time gig is totally different than being able to provide for yourself full-time. Like, that's totally different. And I can just hear them saying something like that, because I've heard a lot of stories, that are just, they break your heart. But I didn't realize there was like that 3-year mark, which, like, if you're chronically ill,
right.
What's going to change in 3 years? That's crazy.
I don't know that other cases aren't shorter or longer. His ended up being 3 years. And so he'd come off it. And then, of course, he'd end up with the doctor's reports and everything back and be back on Social Security disability. But it was just another reason why nothing was going right. And he wasn't going to take the meds. And he was just so stubborn. When he was in his right mind, he had the right mindset about it. He was doing his therapies. He was taking his medicines. And ultimately in 2018, when he had to stop working, I found that staying home for him seemed to be better for his mental health. He went to college for a very short period of time. And it's interesting because when he went for acting. And, even though he describes himself as boring and bored, I just always thought he was such a people person, but really he was just acting. You walk into a room. He even learned all about football and basketball so that he could engage people. He worked at a hotel, that he could engage people at the front desk about the sports that were going on TV. He didn't care about sports. He didn't know anything about them.
But how smart of him, right? Yes. And to your point, he was playing this role. So I can understand what you're saying with that being okay for his mental health and potentially helpful, because he didn't have to exert that energy to act or play a role or to, fill in the blank, learn something to engage with people, even though he did come off as extroverted.
Absolutely. Yeah. He just was always entertaining to me. And so since he always had a story to tell, famous people who came through this hotel or conversations that he had with people that made him want to go learn, even learning like the ins and outs of running a hotel. He was really, really good at it. And he was a people person as much as he tried to say that he wasn't. I do think though that even though it caused social isolation when he stopped working because it was just too painful for him to be on his feet that much, for him to have to move and travel that much. I do think it was almost better for his mental health. He kind of, we like to say he became kept. He would take care of the housework and all the cooking and the cleaning and the dog that they absolutely love. But he became a kept woman at that point.
I love that you can kind of laugh about that. But yeah, I can see how that, I'm like thinking about it myself too, because, I know people that, I think they're extremely extrovert and they're like, no, I have to consciously do this or exert energy. And to be, battling such a long battle with this, rare genetic disease that he had. That's a lot. I just think about that and I'm like, whew, I'm a little tired, thinking about doing that and engaging at that level.
It's a lot. And it's frustrating when he'd go against medical advice, which happened a lot.
Yes.
With the smoking and the drinking. I actually, once we knew what his diagnosis was, it turns out that both parents have to have the deficient gene in order for any of their children to get it. As far as I know, neither of my parents knew that they had this deficient gene. But the more children you have, the more likely a child is likely to get it. So, because I have children, I went and I was tested and I do not have the gene. So my children are safe, thank God. My oldest brother has 2 daughters. He was tested. His girls are safe. My sister was tested. She has a child. Her child is safe. My youngest brother doesn't have any children, chose not to get tested, which I can respect, but I don't know that won't change should he have children in the future. He's awful young. Neither of my parents were tested. So in my own research, I learned about the gene having to come from both parents. I'm sure my mom knows that because she's in the medical field. I don't know that my dad knows, just the guilt alone that they would carry on themselves for it, would make it worthless for them to get tested. So if he doesn't know, it's probably best because he's definitely a worrier and a perseverator. And he would worry about how that would affect my mom. If she knows, she's definitely hiding it from him. But, he never stopped drinking or smoking either. And those are 2 things that could have helped with his progress moving forward, along with using the medications and not taking. So we actually hit kind of a wall, June of 2021. We stayed the exact course that he had been on. And then in June of 2021, I got a call from my brother-in-law that Ben had been dropped off on the front lawn by his supposed best friend, drunk as a skunk. He'd been on a bender for days and days. He had all these empty liquor bottles in his closet that he was hiding. And that my brother-in-law just needed help. He needed, a come to Jesus sort of moment.
Did your brother-in-law think that he hadn't been drinking at that time, Laura? Was he thinking that he was abstaining from alcohol? And then this was kind of like, oh, wow, all this kind of came crashing down? Or what happened leading up to this? Because this was a significant moment in the journey.
Sure. So I think he knew that he drank. I don't think he knew the extent of his drinking.
Right. And he
I
finds all
don't
these
think
bottles and oh my
Mhm.
gosh.
I
Yeah.
don't think any of us knew the extent of his drinking. His so-called best friend apparently did. I tried reaching out to her multiple times, and I've stopped doing that for my own mental health.
Sure.
Um, yeah. So I don't think he understood the extent until that morning when he's crawling in the front door. And then he found the bottles. So it was time for a mini intervention. I called my siblings. I called my parents. My parents actually did go. We drove separately, but my parents actually did go. And, it was extremely painful. It was one of the worst moments ever of my interactions with my brother. It was very, very sad. And my brother-in-law did the majority of the talking. And then we just supported him, and we had to lay some ground rules. If my parents ended up laying some boundaries and ground rules, I don't know what they were. I was unceremoniously let out of the house after I laid mine. And I just said, I want you to be a part of my life and my family's lives, but we can't do this up and down anymore. We can't do this if you're going to be, not cognizant of your own medications and your own health, because we want you around for a long, long time. And I don't want to go tell my children that you had alcohol poisoning of all things, and that's what took you out. So I just said, until you can get yourself together, I'm just not going to have contact with you. And it was awful. And, often people who hurt people. So he had many, many nasty things to say, which is fine. I had broad shoulders and that didn't affect me. But then, I was impolitely asked to leave. So I did. And I don't know if my parents set any boundaries, but that led us to not talk for a little, almost 2 months. He finally did reach out on my birthday, which is in late August, and said, when you said, I don't want to have any contact with you, is that forever? Because I don't want that. And so I absolutely not. It's not forever, but let's get healthy together. From what I understand, he had not been drinking. He still smoked till the end of time, but he had not been drinking. And so we started going back up and going, on play dates with the kids together and FaceTiming together and doing all those things throughout the fall, which I'm really thankful for, because in November was when his story ended with his journey. Unfortunately, we hadn't talked a couple weeks before, and I don't know why. The only thing I can chalk it up to is that I'm a teacher and I went back to school, and the fall is really busy, which is a horrible thing to say. I had asked my brother-in-law to look back at Ben's phone to see, was there someone he was communicating a lot with beforehand, texts or pictures or phone calls, and nothing out of the usual. We had FaceTimed maybe 2.5, 3 weeks before, but we really hadn't talked leading up to his death, which is terrible. I still think about that, but I have my journal and I write to him all the time, and I know that he's with me. So this past week we were on vacation, and we always say, "Oh, pennies from heaven" when we find a penny in public. My children and I, we found a penny every place we went. So we knew he was glad.
That's your sign. I love that.
That is our sign. So we know he's with us.
Yeah.
So on November 1st, he had a doctor's appointment that was just regularly scheduled. And this is of 2021. And his levels were off the charts. The doctor was very, very concerned. They told him he had to go have more blood work done. He had to have a urinalysis done. And then he had to come back on Wednesday, the 3rd. When he went back on Wednesday, the 3rd, it was worse than they had expected, and they wanted him admitted to the hospital. He signed himself out against medical advice, and he went home. Apparently, my mom knew this. I did not know this until my brother-in-law told me the following Sunday night. Overnight Saturday to Sunday, my brother-in-law woke up to terrible noises in the house, and Ben was out of his mind. He was mashing things on the wall. He was completely naked, speaking gibberish. He had broken many, many things. He was bleeding. He was walking in things. He had no idea where he was, and he was getting violent with my brother-in-law, which isn't at all who Ben
Right.
was. So Brett called the ambulance, and the police, and they took him to the hospital where he was still fighting. He had to be, strapped down to the bed and things. He still managed to get up and try and push and shove the nurses. Like, just stay where you're supposed to be. So stubborn.
Even in that state, he's showing his true colors as a stubborn person. I enjoy your story, even, with the hard times, because as we've shared with each other before, my brother Andreas is extremely stubborn too. And as you guys know, listening to my story, it's a very graphic part of my story, but at the end when he's rejecting, everything that could potentially have kept him, going, and I watched all of that, I can look back on that now and I think of how stubborn he was too. So it's, I can connect with you on that energy, Ben, because even till the end, they're stubborn and they're fighting. So yeah, I totally understand that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Until he decided he wasn't going down without a fight. That was totally who he was.
Yeah.
So Brett called me in the middle of the night, let me know what was happening. Monday morning, my parents went. I wasn't able to go Monday, but I took off the rest of the week because I didn't know what was going to happen. So I wasn't able to go Monday. My parents went up. They saw him, they talked to the doctors, and they came home, which I didn't understand at the time. I will say that when I went up on Tuesday, and you're basically sitting and staring and waiting, and it was much easier to hear the doctor say, okay, he's now in an induced coma, and here are his levels, and this is what we're watching for, and then come and sit at home, then sit there. So I understand now why they went up and came back each day. I didn't at the time, but it was much easier to come back home than sit and stare there. On Tuesday night into Wednesday, they ended up putting him on life support. He had gotten to a point where, I have no medical background. Whatever his levels were improving. And in order to keep him alive, to make choices, they had to put him on life support. So on Wednesday morning, I got a phone call actually from my dad asking me to ride along with him and mom, which I normally wouldn't have done, to the hospital for a meeting with the doctor and the patient advocate. And I said, no, if you want, I'll drive up, but no, I'm not going to ride along. And he said, come on, it'll be a comfort to your mother, I said, I'm not a comfort to my mother.
Like, probably not the right thing to say to me to inspire me to do that. Yeah.
And now I ended up riding along, but now looking back, I know why they wanted it to be me, because had I not sat in that room with them and my brother-in-law and the doctors, I know they thought that I would have blamed them for the decisions that had to be made. And I understand that now. But I will tell you, I actually wrote a letter to the doctors after all was said and done, because as busy as this hospital is, as important as these doctors are, they sat in that room. No one checked their watch. No one checked their phone. They made eye contact the entire time. We were the only people on the planet at that time that they had to talk to and give information to. And we asked every question, from the dumbest question to the most important. And they were there with us. And I respected that and I appreciated that, because this is life and death. They made the decision based on the fact that the doctor's advice, the patient advocate's advice, and my brother-in-law had found a binder that my brother had filled out with all of his wishes right there in his handwriting. He never wanted to be on life support. He never wanted to be a burden to anybody. And if he was not going to get better, he wanted to go. And so it was all there in black and white. And he had all the right lingo. So I'm not sure who he consulted, but he knew what he wanted. So they
did some research somehow. So yeah.
Research. And again, he had to be in control.
Determined, in control, that's stubborn. Yep. I feel his energy. Totally. Yep.
Sassy. So they said, let's watch his levels overnight. Things can change at any time in an ICU. They said, let's watch overnight and tomorrow make the final decision, which was going to be on the Thursday, the 11th. And so the decision was made on the 11th that he was going to be taken off life support. So we called all the siblings at my husband. We were all able to be there. While he was on life support, they only allowed one of us in at a time. And we were able to have as much time as we wanted. And then they said, if once he's off the life support, there's no time limit and everyone can be in there, COVID restrictions, things like that, and no one will bother you. So around 4:00 on that Thursday, they took him off life support. We were not in the room when they took him off life support, but we were able to go in after they had taken all the machines and gotten him cleaned up. And then we were all able to go in there. Now, we still gave each other the time to talk to him and be with him one-on-one if we wanted that. I was able to show him videos of the kids and pictures of the kids. We had our 3 favorite songs, had a little dance party, and I sang way too loudly, I'm sure, that I thought he might appreciate. And I was able to, say what I needed to say at the time. So that was good. We made the choice not to have my kids come. None of the nieces and his nephew, my son's the only boy. We made the choice not to have them come and see him that way, which was, I think, the best choice still to this day. And then we just waited and, especially in a family where you don't emote that the challenges are real. My oldest brother just wanted to pray and preach very loudly. Mom was just very factual and about the medical numbers on the screen. My sister was basically the same way. My dad didn't want to hear anybody talking about anything and kept asking what else we were going to be doing. He just couldn't quite see that, once he was off life support, that this was going to be it. I tend to approach these things with humor, which is off color and not probably appropriate in a lot of situations. But laughter kind of helps me through things. And then
Me too. I can connect with that. Definitely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people listening to this too can relate to this part of, all of your story, Laura, and Ben's story. But I think bringing light to the fact that we all go through these, when we go through a really intense moment like this, we all handle it differently. And the fact that 2 years into this journey, after you've lost Ben, you're able to say, you know what, I handle it this way. This is how everyone else handles it. And this is their process. Because I think that's where some people can get stuck in their journey, right? Looking at around them and other family members. And, we don't understand why people handle things in different ways. So I think that's another key point in your story.
Well, it's very challenging. And, I tend to get loud and sarcastic and, probably say a lot of things that are inappropriate that I think are funny. My dad thought I was yelling at Ben the whole time. He'd say, stop yelling at him, stop yelling at him. And I was able to respectfully, I'm not yelling at him, and then just stop whatever I was saying and move on because I knew that bothered him. But it was very challenging to feel so separate from, the 6 people that I should be so close to.
Yes.
In those moments, I knew that I wasn't going to I knew that I didn't want anyone to touch me because that was going to throw me over the edge. But it was almost like, I don't want you guys to touch me. My husband was a different story. My girlfriends, my brother-in-law, different story. It just wasn't, I wasn't there yet. Respectfully now, after the work I've done, I can say I appreciate how they needed to grieve and they couldn't put it into words. I was able to say how I needed to do it. And that's just how I'm different from them, and that's okay. So we talked to him a lot and we talked to each other quite a bit. But after a while, my dad was basically delirious, and my sister and my brother-in-law decided that they needed a little bit of sleep. So around 1, they went back to my brother's house to catch a little bit of sleep. And my oldest brother, my mom, and I just never left the room. We were there the whole time. Around 5, we thought he was going to go. And so we called and we had them come back. We all gathered around and, basically said goodbye. And I held his hand and then he didn't. And then around 6, we thought he was going to go. And we all gathered around and, asked him not to haunt us, but to send us nice messages. Like, please.
There's your humor coming in.
Will scare me, but send me pennies from heaven,
Mm-hmm.
And then he didn't go. And then again, around 10, we thought he was going to go and he didn't go. And I don't know if that's the normal trajectory of someone when they're off life support. But finally, my brother-in-law said, well, it's 10 o'clock now. We've been up all night. Let's get some food in our bellies. So he went and just got a bunch of sandwiches and drinks and sat him down. And we kind of hemmed and hawed and didn't. And then finally, we all sat. Everyone had had a sandwich. Everyone had had a drink. And at 10:53, he went on November the 12th of 2021. So in pure Ben fashion, he made sure everyone else was taken care of, that we all had some food in our bellies, that we were all just calm and cool and sitting, relaxing. And then he went ahead and left us.
And in stubborn fashion too, because it took him a couple times.
I know. Could he not?
Right. I mean, he put you guys through it a couple times, but I think that's a really beautiful part of your story, even though it's such a hard part of your story, is the fact that you guys all had something to eat and drink, and then he was ready.
And that's totally him. You know, I was able to hold his hand, and I had one hand on his chest and one hand holding his hand. And my oldest brother, who was also in the medical field, thought to get the final EKG read from those last few seconds. And I actually have a tattoo over my broken heart of his heartbeat.
I love those tattoos. Like, I love that. Oh my gosh. Like, I'm so jealous of you guys because I think that's so special. I love that. Yeah.
I know.
Very
it
cool.
really does help. You know, it really does help. And I don't know why, but it does. Yeah. You know, I was there with him when he had those final heartbeats, and I was able to hold his hand. And, you know, and then in pure family fashion, as soon as he went, my mother jumped up and went, "Oh, you always called him your baby." I said, yes, he was like my baby. And then I'm grieving like a sister and like a mother figure. And we all, you know, my husband was not there for the passing. He had come home to be with the kids at night, which was what he wanted. So I was supposed to ride home with my parents again. And I just said, please come get me. And he came up and got me so that we could ride back together. And you know, Ben could have been a very healthy alpha one instead of an alpha angel, which he is now. But, you know, one of the things that I've done since is I've joined the Alpha One organization. There's a walk in November. Actually, November is one of the worst months. It's a virtual walk, but I'm going to do this walk and raise some money for them. You know, I buy their merch. They have a big conference every year. I was able
and
to.
How interesting that this goes on in November, and that's when Ben passed away. But anyway, I think things like that are very interesting. But that's amazing that they do all of these things. And we're going to put that in the show notes too for people's reference, because you're bringing awareness to this, Laura. And I think this is something we need to. Laura, can you run through the stats with us? Because this is very rare. Can you refresh my memory on that and share with everyone what the stats are? Because, I mean, the only way we find out about stuff like this is through stories and sharing, but educating ourselves. And that's, you know, one component of many that I really love and appreciate about your story is that you're educating people about this. So can you share that with us?
Sure. So alpha one, usually the symptoms develop between the ages of 25 to 50. Usually it hits families that have many, many children. Both parents have to have the defective gene for alpha one. So it is an abnormal alpha one gene. It affects about 100,000 Americans, and that's about 1 in every 3,000 humans. It does not say male or female more than the other, but the more kids you have, the more risk you have if you have the deficient gene. And what it does is it takes that AAT protein that is made in your liver to protect your lungs, and it either won't let the liver release that protein to help protect your lungs, so it doesn't have enough of it, or it makes too much and your liver can't release it. And then your lungs go unprotected and your liver becomes very, very sick. It's often misdiagnosed as COPD, oftentimes with alpha one, because the lung version of alpha one is more common. People almost always end up on oxygen and struggling to breathe. But because it presents as COPD, that's usually the diagnosis. So even when people pass, it could have been alpha one, but it could have been diagnosed as COPD, especially if you were a smoker. So if you don't have
scary. That's scary.
Yes,
yeah. That you don't. And for Ben, his was even more rare because his was affecting his liver, right?
Yeah.
Not the lungs right away. So did we talk about the stats on that? I mean, that it's even more rare, right?
I know that it is the more rare of the two. I don't have the stats on that.
That's just wild. Oh my
Just that it is underdiagnosed. Your liver's MELD score should be around a 6. Right. And the high end is 40, and the higher that it is, the sicker your liver is. His never got past 22. but it was always since diagnosis, between 17 and 22. And when his liver would start to fail, he would start to turn orangish yellow down to the whites of his eyes, his fingernails, and he would fill up with fluid. His abdomen would fill up with fluid and he would have to be drained. Now, the more of the augmentation therapies that you attend to and take seriously, the better you will be and you can live a long and healthy life. Not saying that you wouldn't maybe end up on oxygen or with other medications and therapies, but to increase that level of AAT protein in your lungs is what helps keep you alive. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
So Ben, were you talking about Ben's numbers?
Yeah. I apologize. So his was never enough to get him on a transplant list for anything. When I went in for my testing, I can tell you my family doctor brought in a consult from the same office because she had never heard of it either and was asking what to mark on the sheet for the people to test my blood. And he knew of it. He knew of alpha-1. He'd heard of it. And he said, "Are you a smoker?" And I said, "No, I'm not a smoker, but I don't know that I have I'm just testing for the gene. My brother has alpha-1." And I said, "He's a smoker." And he said, "Oh, then he's a goner." And my
oh my gosh.
Yeah, my doctor was like, no. And I didn't have any relationship with this man. And I said, no, it's his liver. And he said, "Nope, it's his lungs." And he's like, and he was determined to tell me. And I said, "But it's the liver." And that's when I started researching, because the liver one is much more rare. And I apologize, I don't have the numbers.
Oh no, that's okay. I'm just curious. I'm genuinely curious because I didn't know anything about this until, we first connected and you shared with me about Ben's story. And now we're sharing Ben's story and your story with everyone. But I think this is a really important one to share. And as a lot of you guys have requested to talk about rare diseases, genetic diseases. And so we're doing it. And this is an important one because doctors haven't even heard about this,
Yes.
That's wild to me and mind blowing to me. But, as hopefully we continue to progress in the medical field, we can learn more and more and extend our lives and live healthier lives. And the only way we can do that is by educating people. So I appreciate you doing the research and also giving back to the community. I mean, that's amazing. Because November is such a hard time for you, right? But yeah, I think that's awesome.
And side note, November 12th is also my husband's birthday.
I know you've shared that with me before. So we want to share with everyone, like, wow.
I feel like Ben was intentional. And I know that's a very selfish thing to do, but I like to tell the story how at our wedding, my husband's siblings sat him down with a plate of food and were like, "Yes, this is a really fun party, but you're going to eat." And my siblings did not. They were busy taking bets as to how long we would be married before we got divorced. All in good fun. But Ben led that. And I think as a final, he went ahead and passed on my husband's birthday.
Well, he's a jokester like you. No wonder you guys have so many layers of a connection, but that's a comical thing to do, right?
We are a little sarcastic and sassy, aren't we?
Yes. Yes, I definitely get that from both of you. Yes. I mean, wow. That's definitely an interesting part of your story too. And I think that's interesting that it's on your husband's birthday, but you married a great guy though, so it all turned out okay.
I also think he didn't want that to always be a sad day for me. Like, look, focus on something else. Go have a birthday cake. Go have fun for your husband. So I think it was multi-layered. It was kind of like a little nudge. And it was also like, it doesn't have to be always a sad day. Which I try really hard, to not make it a sad day. It's usually a work day anyway. And Ben's birthday is always the first day of school. So I can't take that day off, but he taught me how to appropriately order and what great sushi to eat. Took me to a wonderful restaurant and spent way too much money on me. So now on his birthday, I take myself out to really good sushi and, celebrate him in that way. Now that I've done the work through the trauma and grief counseling, I can go and not be a puddle and really just thank goodness he let me explore sushi with him. So now I know what's good to eat, and appreciate that. So it doesn't all have to be sad. I'm sad he's not there with me, but it's also, it's one of those, I'm thankful that it happened. I'm not sad that it's over kind of moments.
I do feel like that's a really good quote for your story and for all of our stories, but it takes us, different timelines and journeys. Grief is like a snowflake. No two journeys are alike, right? We say that
Yes.
all the time here. And I think for your journey, it's beautiful that you're able to sit there and remember him on his birthday and have sushi. And like, that's such a special moment. And I can't wait to see a picture of you this year doing that. I love it. But something I think I've been blown away with their story. Two different things I want to touch on, Laura. One, you talk very often about the work that you've done, and you're 2 years into your journey, and that's very fresh still. Um, it's very rare. It's not impossible, but it's very rare that I meet people now that I'm in this community and have put my story out there and all of your stories that you get to a place where you are. And so that's why earlier in the episode, I really commended you for having the support of your husband to go, but, to therapy, but you did it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your work. You did it. Nobody can force you to do the work and really examine your life and examine your grief journey and your trauma. And you uncovered so much from your past, and present, I'm sure, too, and how to navigate that. And so, advice would you give, our credible siblings that are listening or people that are supporting siblings about going to therapy, getting help in your journey? Because this has been so integral in your grief journey and your ability to share today in the way that you're able to share your story and Ben's story.
Oh, sure. Well, you have to be willing to do the work. You have to, it's hard. I filled an entire notebook over the course of 6 months. It is very, very, and that's not how long the therapy was, but just in 6 months, I filled a notebook. It's very, very challenging. You have to be willing to do the work. You have to find a counselor that you connect with. I, of course, never met this woman. We met virtually every time we met, but she would just ask the right question or assign the right homework. Write a letter to yourself if, go create a timeline when. She just had assignments for me, this homework that I did and I could choose when I did it and where I did it. So right mind frame. Okay, now is my 30 minutes to be uninterrupted with my notebook, to, sit with Ben's things and really feel it. I had to be intentional. I had to be willing to do that work, and it had to be, I'd get angry. I'd get real mad. I had one letter that I wrote to my mother that I destroyed. I knew I was never going to send it. And I said everything. And then I just destroyed it to the point where, I ended up putting it in the sink full of water. It's like it completely was destroyed before I threw away the mush, because that's what I needed to do. So you have to be willing to feel the feelings. You have to be intentional about the homework, and you've got to be willing to sort of go there. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be in the place where I am now. I'm sure of it. And I didn't realize what I didn't realize until I did the work, because I didn't think I had any trauma. I'm a grown up. I have children. I have a full-time job,
Right.
I'm not traumatized.
Yeah.
I'm not traumatized. But I could not grieve him appropriately. It was a very unhealthy form of grief, until I did that work and got to this place in my mind where I was like, wow, I needed to express that. I needed to say that. I needed to think about this and work it out. So you just have to be intentional. You have to be willing. I tell my daughter all the time, you may need help. You may not be helpless. There's a big difference. And I didn't want to sit here and be helpless anymore, because I can't get my brother back. That's just not
that.
possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I can ask for help. And, asking for help will lead you through the journey, and doing the work will help you get there in a positive way.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, you can ask for help, but you can't be helpless. Yeah, helpless. Oh, I get chills with that. That's a good one. That's a good one.
It's so true.
I'm getting chills about this part too, because I thank you for sharing about writing those notes, because I think it's so helpful. I did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blown away that you're 2 years into your journey. Just shy, of course, when we're recording this, but I did the same thing. I got stuck in anger, as I've shared with you and everyone else. For me, I can't even imagine being in the place that you're at 2 years in, but I find it inspiring. And I encourage all of you who are listening as well to take it as an inspiration and not as a rush or a slowdown, depending on where you are in your grief journey. Everyone's different. But
Yes.
I wrote a letter to my mom too. Mine took me about I think it was four, maybe approaching 5 years before I did the show. I was still holding on a little bit of anger from her. And boy, did that pen just flow across the paper. It was quite a lengthy note. it was like the last residual anger that was there. And I took it outside. So I love that you went to water because I love that we're giving options because I went to fire. So I went outside to our grill and I opened that grill up and I lit that baby up and it was several pages. And there's something that kind of leaves your body when you do that. It's like you release it because it's not necessary to tell them all of those things. I mean, maybe you feel like you need to. And when I say you guys listening, deal with it in the way that's healthy for you. But I love that you put yours underwater and it disintegrated and I lit mine on fire because there is a release that happens. I know I felt that as well. And I started to feel like I propelled to the next moment in my grief journey after that. And I didn't think I even realized how stuck I was on some of the things that came out of that pen. Came out of the bottom of that pen. It's interesting, right? That exercise.
I didn't realize at all. Yeah. And, what we have to realize, I think, and this is purely my opinion, is people often, and especially as women, if you think of yourself first, you're just selfish. Like, right. Get out of your head. You're just selfish. But that was for me. That wasn't for my mom. I'm the one who has to live in my head and with my heart. And she, what purpose would it be to say all of these things and drag? She probably, I don't know if she would even remember a quarter of the things that I wrote about. So it was for me and it wasn't selfish. It was so that I could move forward because I have to live with me, that was for me. That wasn't for her. So it wouldn't have served any purpose to send it to her or read it to her. I needed to get it out of my system and then put it in the past.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. I couldn't say it any better myself. Perfectly said. So one more thing I want to talk about, Laura, before we talk about where to find more about Alpha One and connect with you, is as you've woven so beautifully throughout your story, is your complicated dynamic with your family, right? Ben was really your kind of your rock, your baby, your, all those things in the family, your connection in your family. And I connect with that part of your story. And I'm sure a lot of you guys listening will connect with that too. And I've been asked many times to share stories on here about complicated family dynamics because we all know mine's very complicated, but yours is as well. But not everybody, it's interesting because from being on TikTok lives and different things like that, some people are very comfortable sharing the family dynamics and a lot of people are not, but they're comfortable behind a screen being like, yes, I'm going through this, like, help me, share a story. So I really, again, commend you with how open you are and just able to share this. But, a question I get from a lot of people, so I want to kind of turn this over to you, is, what does your mom think? Or what does your dad think? Or what does your family think about, they all have different opinions about this, but I feel like it's I owe this to myself. I owe it to my brother and I owe it to the story, and to anyone who needs help along this journey to share that, no, we're not some perfect family that, went and, scattered my brother's ashes. And I think there's power in being vulnerable and power in sharing that, but not everybody's able to do that. So how have you gotten to a place, Laura, where you're able to share and say, you know what, I had to put these boundaries up with my mom, my family, and get to a place where you're okay because this is very public where you're talking about this. Can you share that with us?
Sure. I used to say with my family, set your expectations low because they will reach them. They're weird, but they're mine, and kind of just relay it as lessons for me to learn as a mom, as to not do with my children. And I still think of that quite often, but it became even bigger than that because even as I, in this podcast and with my friends, with my family, describe the different relationships and dynamics in my family, they're all very individualized. Everybody is an individual. Everybody's different. So, we talked before about how my mom wasn't my sister's mom. My mom wasn't Ben's mom. My mom wasn't my youngest and my oldest brother's mom. We all had very different experiences. So where my sister's perfectly comfortable defending her and being her best friend, that's great for her and her relationship with her mother. That's not my relationship with my mother or even my father. And, I know who they are. I know what I can expect from them, but I have to decide how I was parented isn't how I'm going to be parenting. And through the work that I've done, and only through the work that I've done, I decide what I carry forward with me. And that's the most powerful thing that I've taken out of therapy is when she said, you've put it all down. You've said it, you've written it, you've thought it, you've cried it, you've screamed it, you've laughed about it. You've put it all down. Now, what do you choose to carry forward with you? I'm not carrying any of that forward with me anymore. It's too heavy. It's too painful. And I need to be in a place for myself, for my family, for Ben, for my life where it just is what it is. And I choose what I carry forward. So I'm not carrying any of that stuff forward anymore. I already had a little mini test where my mother had some surgery and needed someone to sit with her for a couple hours, 3 days in a row. And, being on summer vacation, they knew I was available. And I went and I did it. And I didn't leave spiraling. I didn't leave crying or in a rage. It was all very polite with some TV watching, some conversation about work. And then I came home and went on with my day. And it was absolutely fine because I choose what I carry forward. I used to always think, oh, I can't say this or I can't do that. I can't schedule this because I'm always the jerk. What their opinion of me is none of my business. I choose not.
Oh, I love that one.
Forward.
That's a good one too. What your
I
opinion of me is none of my business.
I can't take credit for it. I stole it from someplace.
But I have a shirt that says that on there. Again, another chills moment. I literally have a shirt that I bought a few years ago in the middle of this, like the thick of it, when I was thinking that way too, Laura. Yes. And I was just like, and I found that quote. I was like, that's it. That's how I'm feeling right now.
Yes.
I love that.
It's none of my business. I know how I feel about me. I know who I am. I know who my family is. And I'm going to choose not to carry that opinion forward. I'm just not going to do it anymore. So it's a very powerful place. And that really helped me turn so many corners. So family dynamics are challenging and difficult. And especially if, I say Ben was my glue and the glue isn't technically here anymore, but he's always with me. I can still interact with my family in a very polite, positive way. And I'm just moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you said about, I'm not going to carry this with me anymore. I mean, carrying all that stuff with you, it's heavy. It's really heavy. And the journey forward is exhausting when you're carrying it with you. And that's like, I love when we talk about, metaphors or things like that on the show and you can really envision it because I'm quite a visual person. And so when you share that, I just envision being held back when you're wanting to carry so much with you. You don't have to. You can take with you what you want. And I think what a great therapist, what great work you've done, Laura. And I'm just blown away by your story. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, Ben's story, so openly and vulnerably with us on the show. Can you tell us, we'll put this in the show notes, of course, but tell us where to find all the Alpha One information that you were sharing earlier in the episode.
My pleasure. Alpha One, and it's the number one.org is their website for their foundation. And they have many, many things you can do. There's support group, there's question and answer. There's a newsletter that's completely free that comes twice a month. There's walks and conferences and things like that if you want to learn more. It's my pleasure to share his story. He would hate it. Even though I think he liked some attention, he would not love all this attention, but I'm just determined to have Alpha One out there and his story out there because if, down to my last breath, he will not be forgotten. So
I know that. I believe that 150%. And you know what? This story needs to be told for so many reasons. And you have shared so much today on the episode and just so much about your journey, not just about Alpha One and Ben, but your connection and also the work that you've put in. And I just think it's inspiring and I hope it inspires you guys as well. Laura, where is there any social media that you're comfortable connecting with people? I know that you're in some of our groups and stuff too, but anywhere specific if anyone wants to reach out to you about questions about Alpha One?
Absolutely. You can feel free to add my email address to the show note. That would be great. I would love to connect with more siblings that need a connection or want a connection or connect to this story. If it could help anybody, if I can help anybody, I would love to do that. Please reach out.
Awesome. I know you will. Thank you so much for being here today, Laura.
Of course. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you. My pleasure. And thank you guys so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast.